had
And
to.
we'll just do one motion
I don't
for all of them.
I don't know why.
There's a lot of them, I think.
Whatever you think. Are we calling the addendum first? Are
Well,
we calling the addendum first, or are we calling this first?
Well, I'm
we
just-
are live, guys.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's 1:04 on Tuesday, May 16th, Election Day, 2023. I'm Michael Adams, the Secretary of State and Chair of the Kentucky State Board of Elections. I'm joined here at the State Board of Elections office and online by the other members of the State Board. And we came in at 6 this morning, but we'll reconvene and we'll retake the roll, make sure we get everybody. And I'll start with the members that are here in person. Member Sears.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Dwight Sears, member, Pulaski County.
James Lewis from Clark County Clerk and Relational County.
Michael Brown, member, Jefferson County.
Jerry Johnson, member Franklin County.
Ben Chandler, member Woodford County.
Deanna Brangers, member Jefferson County.
Lynn Lane, member, retired clerk from Ballard County.
And we have member Skolnick virtually appearing with us as well. From Jefferson County. All right, well, let's proceed. So the first item on the agenda is approval of our minutes of our April 18th meeting. Do we have a motion for that? Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Any changes? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Next, we have approval or ratification of County Board of Election replacements pursuant to KRS 117.035. Karen, if you could walk us through those.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Shelby County and Grant County both, Shelby County's Democratic member was not going to be available today. So they needed to have a replacement for election day to serve today on their county board. The Democrat Executive Party submitted paperwork, and the first name on the list is Douglas W. Butler. And
Can I ask, I'm not seeing that.
Go to page 2.
It's in the, it's in the big.
it's in the big.
That
one,
Yes.
that's the date on that. That's,
We have an addendum.
Go to,
This is an addendum.
that's not current.
look at page 2, Jerry, on that, in your book.
You got that.
Okay. Y'all give me too much information.
I think it's page 5 of the thicker one. The thicker one.
Yes, yes,
Go, right. The
5 and 6.
5 and 6.
Yeah.
Where their current member was not going to be available at all today to be in session for the election day. So the party recommends, completed the paperwork. The first name on the list is Douglas W. Butler, to serve today on the Shelby County Board of Elections, just election day. Grant County as
Have we
well.
ever done a temporary one like this? Okay.
And Grant County, their Republican representative was not available on election day today, and the party recommends Hilbert Hensley as the replacement for election day. This is temporary replacement for election day. And I present both of those for approval. I don't know if you want to take them separate or together. Any questions, we're happy to answer, but yes, we have done this.
I think we can do them together. Do we have a motion for that?
Some of it.
Second, member Brangers, all in favor? Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Next, approval for ratification of additional precinct officers pursuant to KRS 117.0456, 31 KR 4120. I think we have several of these. I'll let Karen guide us through those.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. They're both the addendum and the main packet have names because names for additional requests for precinct officers were coming in last evening, as well as, when we got here at 6 this morning. So I'll just read off the total for each county for additional precinct officers needed. But you might have to look at both of your, packets. In Lawrence County for today, they need 4 additional precinct officers, 1 for 1 precinct, 1 for 4 consolidated precincts, 1 location with 4 consolidated precincts, and 2 additional precinct officers in 2 consolidated locations. In McCreary County, they needed a total of 12 additional precinct officers, 5 additional election officers for 1 precinct, 3 additional for another precinct. When I say 1 precinct, it's different numbers, different precinct numbers. 2 for another single precinct, 1 for another single precinct, and 1 for another single precinct. And the precincts are listed on their request. In Muhlenberg County, they need 2 additional precinct officers for 2 precincts. There would be 1 for 2 precincts, 2 additional officers for 2 precincts. And I believe that concludes the additional officer requests. And Sheila's shaking her head, thank you. I told her to double check my numbers.
I think we can do this all together, too, don't you?
Yeah, I think so.
We have a motion?
Yes. Yes.
Moved in second, all in favor. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Next, approval or ratification of emergency precinct officers pursuant to KRS 117.45 subsection 5.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And again, the detail is in both the packets that you received. We had some requests late yesterday and early this morning. Emergency precinct officers for ratification. Monroe County had a total of 3. They need 1 emergency precinct officer for 6 precincts, and they need 2 emergency precinct officers for 2 consolidated. Now, also in Monroe County, and this is for ratification, Monroe County needed 2 emergency precinct officers for their early polling locations on May 11th, 12th, and 13th. So that's also included. The remainder of these will be for election day only. Adair need 1 emergency precinct officer for 2 precincts. Crittenden, 1 emergency precinct officer for 1 consolidated precinct. Hancock, 1 emergency precinct officer for 8 precincts. McCreary, 2 emergency precinct officers for 1 precinct. Metcalfe County, they needed 1 emergency precinct officer for 1 precinct. In Clark County, they need a total of 2, 1 emergency officer for a consolidated precinct and 1 emergency officer for a voting center. In Grant County, they needed a total of 3, 2 emergency precinct officers for 1 vote center and 1 emergency precinct officer for another vote center there in Grant County. Muhlenberg County had a total of 4 need, 2 emergency precinct officers for 1 precinct, 1 emergency precinct officer for 1 precinct, 1 emergency precinct officer for 1 vote center. And in Magoffin County, they had 1 precinct officer needed for 1 precinct. And Breathitt County had 3 officers needed for 1 precinct. And I believe that concludes it. Thank you, Sheila. Double checking my number. So,
All right. Do we have a motion to approve, to ratify all of that? Is there a second? All
I
in
have a
favor?
question, please,
Mhm.
if I can, and I don't want to get down the rabbit hole, but it's very evident to me on a number of these. We are, I mean, I'm only picking Hancock because I'm looking at it right now. So we have 3 Democrats who are special or emergency members who will be serving as Republicans.
and some of them are vice versa.
And that's where I'm going. Then you've got several more Republicans who are going to be serving as Democrats. Then if you go back to, whatever the first county was, I think it's, Monroe County. We have 11 emergency, is that right, in Monroe? I'm giving you, ever how many it is. They're all Republicans serving on behalf of Democrats.
Because there aren't any Democrats in Monroe.
But I'd like to understand just very quickly, we're beginning to do this more often. And so I want to know legally what is the requirement under the law. And it just, if I'm a Democrat member of one of these counties and I go in to vote and there's 3 or 4 Republican members running the precinct, it's going to naturally raise an issue to me, potentially. So I just want to know what the statute provides, how we get to this point, and it looks like something we're going to have to think about going forward. It's not a long-term fix, it doesn't appear to me, so.
Get the statute.
I do, it's 117.045 is the statute broadly, specifically in the Johnson subsection 4 there outlines steps for lists to be submitted. And this is the end of that road, if you will. The term used is all reasonable efforts. And if you get to this point, you've exhausted the outline, it's A through F of what those efforts are to be. So remember Chandler's point, I think what we're seeing is a lot more one-sided registration in some counties.
But the statute requires 2 of each, right?
It doesn't require, because now we've changed, I can't remember if it was 574, 564. We've allowed independents, your other, your Green Party, et cetera, to be also election officers. And that's something that we might reiterate at one of the next KCCA trainings, that you don't necessarily have to first look to find a Republican to serve as a Democrat, or a Democrat to serve as a Republican. Might try to mine the way on other. I use the word other because other is a term, but are additional registrations that we have throughout the state.
Maybe post meeting, you can provide me with a little bit more information. This is vastly different in terms of, at least some of us old timers, in terms of how we manage some of the precincts. So I'm sure we're doing it legitimately, but I would like to hear a little bit more about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, item 6. Citing the biennial budget that was enacted last year. State Board of Elections shall set rates for the expenses for precincts, et cetera. I'll turn this over to Karen.
And
rates. And basically the rates. If I see dollar signs, then
the fiscal office.
So every year we set the rates that are provided with the statutes in this. So KRS 117.345 by statute, it is listed as $255 per precinct. So that would continue. And what was listed in our what was awarded in our biennial budget. So that will be covered for FY24. KRS 116.145, that is also set in statute at 25 cents. So that would remain the same as well. KRS 117.343, statute states that it is a maximum of 50 cents per voter, but that is contingent upon the amount of funding that is awarded in the biennial budget. And so it would decrease in FY24 to 46 cents. The reason is we had more registered voters, newly registered voters this year than we anticipated. And also because the fiscal year is going to run and we will have more, we anticipate having more newly registered voters because of the presidential election. And so that would cause that to decrease by 2 cents. Questions?
You need an action.
I have a question. It's kind of a historical question.
Sure.
As far as we know, the rates that are statutory, those were set a long time ago before inflation. Is that true?
They had, it's been a while.
Yeah, and so for folks that are watching, I think these numbers will be adequate for helping our counties run their elections, but I do think that we need to raise these rates. They were passed, I think in the eighties is when these statutes were enacted, seventies. So those numbers are not up to date with what it really costs to run these elections. Of course, we don't have any ability to change any of that.
Right.
It's a decision for the legislature and the governor. All we can do is pass along what money that we get appropriated.
And can I just also add that, since KRS 117.343 is a maximum of 50 cents, we only kind of give what last year's rate was. But in FY 21 and 22, we kept it at that maximum, but that's because we had an influx of CARES dollars that were offsetting our regular operating expenses. So we wanted to maximize what we could give to the county. So it has decreased since then because we didn't have anything to offset our regular budget for that.
Rachel,
Mhm.
has the actual dollar amounts compared 23 and 24 for the reimbursement for the registered voter, has that increased or decreased? I know the rate's down, but how's the money available? We're gonna know we got a huge purge and we took a lot of people off the rolls.
Sure.
We have more than new registered voters that are compensated.
It
for
runs
that.
through a period of time, so it runs through April to April, so it does fluctuate when you run the report for that, we pay it in May. But it has fluctuated some. It's also, we have to make an assumption based on the trends of how many newly registered voters, because 116, 145, and 117, 343, they come out of the same pool of money. So if we set the rate at the maximum of 50 cents and then we have, a huge amount of registered voters, we may not have enough money to compensate for the newly registered voters. So it's a trend line of where we think we're going to be, taking into consideration of that it's going to be partial for the presidential election of newly registered voters.
Yeah, I understand. You're trying to estimate.
Yeah.
And not take it from whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was curious because I know we got a huge purge of voters. Why necessarily goes down.
It's because of the anticipation of the newly registered voters that
We are flat now compared to where we were a few years ago when we started the last presidential campaign because of the purge. So if you average the numbers out, if you look at them, basically the purge was enough to basically undo all the new people that registered in 2020 for the presidential election. So we're actually kind of flat over the last 3 years. But I do think that Rachel is right that we will have another pop of interest next year. Yes.
I don't want to open a Pandora's box, but I guess I am a little bit. This has to do, of course, with the whole precinct issue. And at some point, this board is going to have to take on that issue because obviously we don't have all the precincts open. We have a lot of issues surrounding precincts versus voting centers, how they work together, how they interface. And at some point, that system is going to have to be determined, I think, by this board and which direction we go, or at least maybe recommendations made to the legislature if we need to do that. But some of this funding, of course, is based on the number of precincts that each county has. Whether they're using those precincts or not, right?
they have a voting machine.
Well,
Yep.
they have a voting machine, even if it's in mothballs, you mean?
So no ghost precinct. So if they had a voter. Yes.
What if they don't have any precincts at all?
Well,
And all they have is vote centers.
By law, they still have the precincts.
Yeah.
That's all they
The
need. The
precincts
vote
are still-
centers.
Well,
Precincts.
Right,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's
Well,
a
they're
different
not,
situation.
So,
Just put it that way.
so I welcome it.
Depending on the ghost precinct.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
there's no voters. in ghost
Right.
precincts.
So I think what we see is kind of two different funding streams. One is per voter, one is per precinct. And to your point, I agree with that the precincts are on paper. And they exist whether or not that method is utilized by the county. And so something that I've raised, I think some other members have thought about this too, is would it be better to have all the money go toward voters, or would it be better to have the money go toward precincts, but have the precincts that are opened get the funding, right, versus precincts on paper? So I think the model that we have to operate off of, unless the law is changed next year or subsequently, is it's not how many precincts you open that dictate how much money you get, it's how many you have on paper. And that decision is left to the local government to write a map of how many precincts they want to have. But the incentive is there to create more precincts than you need, so you get more money.
Well, that's right. So that issue, obviously, it's a complicated issue, but it's an issue that's going to have to be dealt with. And the other issue that's connected to it is a more practical issue, and that is, how do we actually open precincts at the same time as we have individual precinct locations, at the same time as we have vote centers in the same county? And it causes, I think, some confusion for the voter, because there's one location in the county that you can go to no matter where you live. And then if you go to another location, you can only go there
Right.
if you happen to be in that precinct. That's confusing.
It is confusing, and not all counties do that. Some do all vote centers, some do all precincts, and some do a hybrid. But they'll change their model depending on the election and the turnout they expect and so forth. And that gets confusing.
Mhm.
And it's also worth noting that this $255 per precinct might, in some instances, cover the cost of one poll worker.
Hmm.
Like, maybe it won't in Jefferson County. So the clerks are not making money off of this, it's just gonna offset a little cost.
Can I just answer, James, a little bit? As I was thinking about your question. So when we were at the 50 cents during the pandemic, and that was the maximum, and we were getting this offset, we went to 48 cents after that, because we were still kind of feeling a little residual. So these payments don't go out until the very end of the year. So we haven't even put out the payments this year. Because counties, some of these counties have to claim, right? And so sometimes they do that expeditiously and sometimes they do not. And so we don't have realistic data yet for this year. So it's kind of as if when you sat your last biennial budget, that's how much money we got. And that was in 2020. But we've superseded, they estimated how many registered voters that they thought they would have during that period. And we have way superseded that number. So we're going to have to, as we increase, we're going to have to back off a little bit unless they start awarding us more money that we can go to the maximum. So that's why I think that the safest bet for us financially, the most fiscally responsible, would be to recognize the newly registered voters going forward. And then we'll have, once we do this, we'll have 2 years of statistical data post-pandemic.
Well, I understand that, and I assume that was an issue. I hate to see a huge drop in revenue for the counties because of sudden drop in registration because of the urgent approval.
I would say,
Necessary for-
yeah, it shouldn't result
Yeah.
in a drastic drop.
Mhm.
Some counties may not even notice it, but yeah, that's the goal and that's the conversation going forward.
I think it might be a good idea, not today, but sometime before the session comes back, to have us sit down, maybe in a work group, and come up with, if we can find some consensus ideas for consideration. Maybe we get away from per voter or per precinct and come up with a different model. Just
Population savings.
Yeah. You also have to factor in that population of one county with mountains and the population that's flat could have totally different expenses. And a greater need to open more locations because their population is more dispersed. So it gets real complicated, I'm
Or
sure.
an average turnout. what counties have the greatest turnout? Not necessarily the greatest registered number of registered
Right.
voters.
Well, that probably not a good idea, but it doesn't matter how many people you have come out and vote, election costs you the same if you prepare for 100% turnout or 2%. So you could really penalize counties because suddenly you have a low percentage. So, yeah. So, yeah, that.
There's just lots of different formulas that you could adopt, and that would be a good reason why that might not be the best one.
I think the legislature has split the difference by having different funding streams and different criteria to kind of cover their bases. And maybe that's a good idea, but maybe we can look at it better.
Just to note, though, if this is a conversation that you do want to make changes to as far as the rates are concerned, the biennial budget is this year. And they have moved that up a month, so it's typically, you know, in November, we're doing it in October this year. And any funding request that we would do would need to be an additional budget request for these funds. So we would need to make a decision sooner rather than later about what our proposition would be. And
Well, I think there's one thing we can all agree on, and that is legislature does not give the counties enough money to run an election.
Just their fair share would be very
This law was written before most of these legislators.
What is our action on simply go ahead and approve
just to,
that?
yeah, the board would need
formula?
to approve the rates as they are listed, that we can send to the Office of State Budget Director.
Okay.
Miller.
So,
So we have a motion in a second. Is there any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Number 7, you keep the floor, Rachel.
You all are so lucky. Okay, so there is going to be just a little bit of difference this month. If you look at the overall operating budget on page 17, there is a negative total. And that is because we are at the end of the year and we are starting to move expenses around. If you look on page 18 for the itemized, you'll see that under computer services, we did move some data storage charges over to federal charges. Those are anything from regular data storage to CISA charges, server storage space, trying to think of what else, and some switches. So those are all applicable to the security grant. So we took those for 2 months worth and we moved them over. We're trying to move them over in the smallest amounts as possible so that we can be more state funded for these types of things. But unfortunately, at the end of the year, you know, we may have to move some to federal. So that is what we did there. And that was a large sum of $45,000. So it encompassed all of the other operating expenses. So we spent negative $960 this on paper.
Can I make a request? Can we make this font bigger?
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
Maybe turn it landscape, we can blow it up a little bit.
See, it wasn't a big thing at the beginning of the year. We didn't have that problem, but yes, I will.
I'm getting older.
Let's jump as age members here.
Stay, remember, say, that's for sure.
Grandfather.
That's what happened.
So other transactions on page 19, 20, and 21 are pretty typical, nothing major there as far as expenses. I will say that we did submit our federal financial reports, our semi-annual reports, and our progress reports to EAC. They are going through the process of reviewing all of those, so we haven't heard back yet. Neither good nor bad, but I'll take no news as good things so far. And then we were notified, I think at the end of last week, that EAC is performing audits on Section 251 and election security grants. They're actually auditing all 50 states. There's been a turnover in leadership at EAC, executive staff. So They're doing audits in all 50 states. So we're in the group for section 251 and election security, and we're part of, I think, 32 states that are being audited for that. We don't have any information on what, we know that it is pertaining to interest, state earned interest, but we don't know exactly what. There's a meeting on Thursday, a webinar, where they're going to inform us a little bit more about that, but that's all we know right now. So we're not being targeted, we're just having fun, I guess, depending on who you're talking to. Page 22 is the e-poll book project. There is still a large sum. That is because we have ordered F5 hardware and software. That is about $400,000, but we haven't paid for it yet. So we had to go through COT approval, had to go through finance approval to add to the master agreement. So that is going to show up probably this month that we'll pay that invoice. So you'll see that number starting to dwindle, hopefully rapidly. And then summary page, and that is really, I'll be quiet now unless anybody has any questions.
I move approval of the report.
Second.
Motion and second, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Thank you, Rachel. KCCA, do we have anyone from?
She didn't get on. She was hoping to be able to jump on.
Well, I know
at
they're
one,
busy
so
today.
she-
There anyone voters? We will bypass vote understandings.
She's a little bit.
Number 9, Executive Director.
Okay, I just have a few things and try to be brief. I do want a little update on what Rachel, some about House Bill 1. That is the House bill where over the next 2 years, 12.5 million will be distributed for voting equipment. So far, 140 contracts have gone final. And the amount of 12.5 million that was to be distributed this year we have met that completion for this year. We'll move into the next fiscal year 24. DLG and SBE we've worked really well together. The county clerks have been thrilled because their money is just turning around very quickly to them. So and knowing they're conducting elections and all the money they're spending and the poll book reimbursement through this process, they are really getting their money quickly. And I know that's been a big help for them as they move toward this primary election and the expenses that they have. So we feel real good about the first 12.5 million being near completion and dispersed in this fiscal year as the legislature and the governor wanted to happen. So
Could I interject? We expect to spend all that money hopefully by the end of the year, because on January 1st, 2024, the mandate to transition to paper ballots takes effect. So we want to encourage the counties to move.
actually, we have all the counties probably by November will have all this. We have 3 counties remaining that have done bids for their equipment. Richard knows a little more about that, but we expect those 3 counties to have at least purchased it. We hope they'll receive it by November because believe it or not, the equipment companies are a little bit behind in trying to get the manufacturer done of their equipment, but they will have met the January 1st deadline. They will all own it.
Great.
They will all. So I think it's 3 left, Richard. So Rachel's worked with them, Richard's worked with them. We've all worked to try to push them, get it done. We've had numerous conversations with their fiscal court, their county treasurer, helping them to understand the reimbursement process. So I feel really good that deadline is actually going to be met, and hopefully 120 counties have all equipment November 23.
That's great.
So
I'd love to have it all dispersed by
yes,
January.
and I was going to mention the Homeland Security grant that I mentioned at the last one, the $145,445, working with the Secretary of State's office and our office to get that grant from the Kentucky Office of Homeland Security to do the fold-up security cards. We got all the information submitted timely, May 5th, to the KOHS. And I believe we know what counties need the security cards. I think they were very pleased that that was what we were going to use the funds for. But I will say the requests the counties had for those cards far exceeded the amount of money that we have. So we'll do the best we can, but that is something to maybe look toward in the future for future funding for the counties. That they may need if there's an opportunity to get some more election supplies in the next biennium budget for the counties. And I think they would all really appreciate that. So, so we're glad to have that. Polling locations for those people listening, I think Secretary Adams mentioned it this morning. You can go to govote.ky.gov. Your polling locations are there as well after 6 p.m. That's the same address you can go to for election night results. We have new features and enhancements to our election night reporting system, and the county clerks will begin the process of uploading the results after 6 p.m. this evening. So if you'd like to see that, that's also at govote.ky.gov and go to election results. And I want to compliment our staff. Our IT staff have worked really hard to enhance, and I think the public will see a significant difference in the reporting this year. The reapportionment, I'll just briefly mention that reapportionment in all the counties. The process began May 1. More to report once we get into June, but the counties have contacted their ad districts and their fiscal courts and working to get their committee together and begin the reapportionment process. And Richard's been working very closely with that group and the ad districts to help the counties and their GIS, so we have good maps. And of course, that will also come back to the board later in the summer and fall. So, and the Cradle Point grant is complete. All the Cradle Points have been delivered to the counties and probably in use today. So we're happy that that's completed, and that's my report. Other than encouraging people, polls are still open till 7 local time. Get out and vote. Turn it back over to you.
Member Lewis?
Yes.
Have you had any discussion with county clerks after the reinforcement process of how the county boards may or may not reduce the number of precincts?
Well, they haven't really gotten that far yet, have they, Richard? There probably, maybe has been some discussion with the county boards that we're not aware of. I'm not aware of anything in particular. I know there's anecdotal discussion, but nothing in particular. They've pretty much been focused on May 16th and the fiscal court of, doing their advertising to get their reapportionment committee together. And some counties are just now getting their ads finished and committees done because so many counties only have one publication, a week. So, it takes a little bit of time to get those done. But Richard, do you have anything to add about that?
No, I mean, there have been talks about some consolidation or some cleanup of and trying to work with their school board districts and their city governments to try to clean up some of the ballot issues they have, to reduce the poll workers in the future, so there's not so much confusion with it. So I don't know what they'll do yet, but we will see this summer.
And I thought that might be an incentive for some of the county boards to reduce precincts. But school board issues, that's difficult for county boards and county clerks because it can lead to a lot of split ballots and a lot of cost for counties. So yeah, that's an issue I wish the General Assembly would address, is school board districts being, I guess, similar, if not identical to established precinct boundaries. But okay, I was curious. I thought this might be a chance. A lot of counties will reduce some precincts because of the change in law on voting.
Well, as we referenced earlier, I think it would be good for us to make some notes of things that we might suggest for consideration and approach the legislature in the fall with those ideas.
Can I ask a question? It's appropriate. Since vote centers have been in place, you know, we look at voting centers as one category of voting option, and then we look at a precinct as another. I don't know they have to be exclusive of each other. Is there any reason, and I've got to believe it's equipment, that would keep a precinct? Why could a precinct as it exists not also operate in terms of people being able to vote there regardless of where they are? Why does it have to be a vote center? Sure, that's what the statute says. But why could that not be applicable to whether it be a center or a precinct?
As a legal matter, a center is just a place where you can vote regardless of your precinct, right? So some of the counties have opened all their precincts and they're all vote centers. Because through the use of the e-poll book, they can check in someone from a different precinct at that location. Because there's nothing magic about locations, they're just locations. So there's three general models that counties follow. One is to do all vote centers, and there may be a few of them, there may be a whole bunch of them, but regardless, it's vote centers. Another model, maybe a third of the counties do this, is open up the precincts, precinct style, where you live in the precinct, you work in the precinct as a poll worker where you live, and only the voters in the precinct can vote there. And then some others do kind of a hybrid. They might have one vote center downtown at the county seat, one larger facility, a community center or something that can service a larger number of people. And they'll also have precincts, but even then they consolidate those precincts. And so I think that's what Jefferson County, for example, where Deanna and I live and Member Skolnick lives, that's how they're doing it. It's kind of a mix. And it will change election to election depending on factors like availability of poll workers, availability of precincts, and the expected turnout.
I guess in my mind, it's still using folks who believe that you can't have both. So a precinct can be a vote center.
Mhm.
It does not have to be a consolidated. So you don't have to reduce 20 precincts down to 4 locations in order to be able to do vote center stuff. You could actually have all 20 of those, and you're saying that we do have some that are all voting centers.
We need to have enough hardware.
So it's equipment is the bigger thing. So when we talk about consolidation, you know, when you all went through this originally, it was for an entirely different reason and why it would happen. I just don't want us to get away from the fact that what vote centers allow is one of the best things that has ever occurred, but they don't have to be in a consolidated environment in order to work. It's just an equipment issue, right?
It would be a personnel issue too.
Yeah, personnel.
Somebody has to work there.
Yeah, because I mean, if you had all your precincts open, and you operated them all as a vote center. If people started, well, usually a precinct will have one check-in station typically.
Right.
One judge, 2 judges and a sheriff, 4 people. A vote center will take and add more people up front for check-in purposes. If they have print-on-demand ballots, they may set it different, and then they kind of flow it through, and then it'll have more than one scanner typically in a vote center. So it'll have more equipment, more personnel to handle larger crowds of people.
I worry sometimes that we broadly have gotten into the thought that consolidation is the only way we can do some of the things that we talk about. So I don't know that, I still think that we've got to be thinking more about access and how we provide that within the environment that we live. If we provide more, if the legislature can provide more money, then that's probably going to help a little bit. But I don't want us getting to the point of thinking that we have to provide less offerings in terms of people to access in order to provide vote center components. I just worry that's what we're doing more of, is consolidating than we are in terms of more strategic ways of providing greater levels of access. And I know we're going to be talking about that as we go into next year. I just worry this fall, there's going to be a much bigger voting time than it is in the primary. Next year, of course, is going to be really big. And so I just think we need to be thoughtful and strategic as we talk with our partners in counties as to how we provide greater levels of access at the same time that we understand both their income needs and then people and machines. So
I agree, this is an issue that has to be grappled with, just how we do this precinct versus vote center, and then getting people to understand what it is we've done and why we did it. And I'm like you, Jerry, I think one of the very best things we can do is have every location that is open be available to whoever shows up within that county. And if that were the case, then you wouldn't have some of the confusion that I remember before this occurred, where people didn't know what precinct they lived in. And they'd go to one precinct and they were denied the ability to vote because they didn't happen to be registered in that precinct. So you do away with that problem if you have vote centers. And the question then is, like Jerry says, how are you going to have the vote centers available geographically in enough locations to have access? But that, all of that, I think, is something that we need to take up to get more access, or certainly at least as much access for people. And I just love the idea that we can avoid the confusion of going to the wrong place. That's nice.
Well, you just hit on one of the big issues that I think a lot of these clerks are gonna have, because we've had it in Jefferson County repeatedly, is the locations. Is finding locations, and sure, we can, in some instances use schools, we can use, any publicly funded building, but just because we can use a publicly funded building doesn't mean it's an ideal location. It would suggest to me, well, why can't we use the fire departments? I said, well, I've never known fire departments to have big parking lots. So, you've got, yes, it's a publicly funded building. Yes, they probably, have a place, maybe have a place, where it is, but we have had a lot of locations in Jefferson County that I'm aware of that might host a precinct or polling location, and then just decide, hey, this is not worth it. We do not want to enter into a lease with you all to do this again. And it happens every election cycle. And then when you lose that location, then you got to find another location. And that's not always the easiest thing to do. So it's personnel, it's equipment, it's location.
And there's nothing new about any of this.
Oh, no, this goes way back.
This is a constantly evolving thing.
This is way before COVID.
Yeah.
This has been an
This is
evolving.
way before automobiles.
Yes.
You didn't have to worry about, you had to have somebody take care of your horse, I guess. But I mean, the needs of the voter are constantly evolving. And that's just what we have to deal with, is how we best meet those needs
Yeah.
that presently exist, trying to look toward what needs will be there in the future, or the near future, as far as we can see ahead.
Yeah, it's just a very complicated dynamic to have. I mean, the poll worker issue has been an issue that has only gotten worse. I have been talking about that for well over a decade. That probably some people just wanted me to shut up, go away, but it's done nothing but get to be a worse problem.
It's a conversation I think this board needs to have at some point, maybe a meeting just to talk about this. And the staff maybe look at some ideas about the best way to go forward with a seamless system as we can come up with.
Hopefully in advance of September, when these plans are going to be due for us.
Either that or,
Yeah.
or in advance of next year. If we don't want to mess with it this year, I mean, we just have to decide what's going. Well, that's some groovy music.
It's something calling extraordinary. I used to have my favorite song on there, and I forget that my favorite song. It always sounded when bad stuff was going on.
I need to set the music playing on the screen.
It's good.
audio settings.
I'd like to echo what Karen had mentioned about the Go Vote statewide.gov. That really is impressive. If you've not had a chance, we had a demonstration for those that weren't here, but even on your phone, it's really a unique place to go and pull and watch the data. So I would encourage, I know some of you weren't here for that presentation. Stick around and maybe Tom and the team can show that again. But, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I'd just
Great
like
work,
to-
congratulations.
It is, it's
No.
really good.
I'd just like to say, I think Ben has a good suggestion. Examining the process. Examine the history of it, why it's like it is, how it can be changed within the Constitution. Because that is to some of the things that we're looking at.
Yeah, well, and if we think it's important enough, if we do an
Right.
analysis, we think it's important enough, we might suggest a constitutional
Right,
change,
exactly.
you know.
I think those changes need to be made. To accommodate what we're doing.
I think everybody wants the same thing, and that is ease of voting and the people who have to run the election in the county. That we want to ease their ability to run that election.
I do think that over time, not immediately, but over time, that the use of early voting will increase, and it will take some of the pressure off these precinct locations on election day itself. All of our surrounding states have early voting, and they have for a long time. And it took a few cycles to catch on, but once it did, it caught on, and it smoothed the turnout over a few days, and it made election day a lot more livable than polls.
It's a big deal. It's a
Yeah.
big deal. I mean, those are.
But it's a positive.
Oh,
Yeah, but it takes time to work.
But that's, I mean, what we have done, and everybody here has been a part of it, to increase voter access. 3 days of voting before election day is a huge increase
It is.
in voter access. And that's a big deal. And then the vote centers are another thing that we've done that's been a new effort, and I think that has been a plus, but it's going to take some time, as you say, Mr. Secretary, for the voters and the citizens to
Exactly.
get used to all of
And
this.
it's constant education. They only think about this twice a year.
Mhm. And usually they don't think about it until they wake up in the morning
Exactly.
on election day.
Exactly. It's a phone call.
Well, something for our wish list for next year is, if you all recall, we had $1 million in 2020 to advertise early voting. And we did it in a totally nonpartisan way. We just said voting early is the same as voting on election day. And we were able to have 45% of our votes cast before election day. That took the pressure off of election day. When we were in the middle of COVID and we had our locations closed and long lines of people in masks. So that was a big godsend. But the reason that succeeded is because we spent money to advertise it.
Yeah.
And I do think it would be helpful for us to ask in the next budget for the legislature to give us some modest amount of money to advertise that. That will also take pressure off of election day.
Yeah, good idea.
Any other questions or comments for Karen's report? I think it's where we were, right?
I think so.
Okay. We took it over. All right, thank you, Karen. So without objection, I'm going to move other to after the closed session, just in case anything pops in the closed session that we need to vote on. So I'm going to move that to after number 12. Number 11, we do need to set a next meeting date to certify the totals from today's election. If members want to check their calendars and then come back at 7 o'clock tonight and set it, that's fine with me. Sorry, 1 second. Do we have someone here? Oh. Okay.
What day did you say?
So as I understand, we've looked at it, and the latest date by statute that we can do this is Monday, June 5th. Is that right?
The latest day?
That's the latest day. I don't think there's an urgent need to do it quickly because there's nothing for anyone to be sworn into. There's a state senate seat, but there's no legislative session intended soon. So June 5th works for me, but if members have a conflict.
I can do June 5th, but it has to be the afternoon. That would be the point.
Monday's really bad for me. I might be able to make the afternoon also, but not the morning.
I mean, it shouldn't be a long session, right?
We won't have any other pending
There shouldn't
business.
be any other business.
Later in
Just
the day.
Certification of the totals.
Do we want to throw out 1 o'clock on the 5th?
That's too late for me.
It's too late,
I mean, too early.
too early.
I can't. I've got a board meeting that ends at 2.
I can do it starting at 2 that day. I can do it in the morning or.
2 or
at 2.
3 is too early. 3.
I mean, it is for me. 3 I can do.
Yeah. Why don't we do this? Why don't we throw that out and then if members want to come back in about 5 hours, and if that won't work, then we'll come up with something different.
Can we do it virtually or hybrid? Have a
Oh, I
hybrid?
would
mean,
assume we
that-
can. Yeah, yeah.
That would, I think, maybe make it easier on everybody. I mean, particularly you, Lynn, you've got the longest.
Well, let's pencil that in and then we'll come back and if we can change it, we'll change it.
3 o'clock on the fifth.
That's right. We have we have a window that we have to work within because we have to wait 9 days for any recanvases. I don't know if we'll have any, but we have to leave that open. So we got Memorial Day in the middle, so it's kind of swirly, but I think that'll work. If it won't, it's reconvene and we'll reassess that. So that takes us to executive session. I do understand from our staff that we are recommended to take an executive session to discuss security. I don't know if we have any litigation to discuss. Briefly, okay, so we do have both to discuss. Do I have a motion to go into executive session? Member Brown and Member Lewis with a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.